Star Citizen has been promising VR since the Kickstarter. For most of that time, that promise lived on the roadmap between maybe someday and we've got bigger problems. But back in October 2025, before CIG had hinted outside of a few blink and you'd miss it statements about internal VR testing that was underway, I was already in the game wearing a headset. It took Vorpex, third-party launchers, and a stack of workarounds that broke every other patch. Oh, and it only worked in offline Arena Commander. I did it anyway because through all of that, even through the jank and the crashes and the things that flat out didn't work, you could feel what this game was supposed to be in VR. The scale clicks in a way it never does on a monitor. Cockpits feel like real places. And once you experience that, going back to a flat screen is like watching a travel documentary on TV instead of being there in person. Don't laugh, it's hard to find an analogy for that. You really need to experience VR to understand it because unfortunately I can't simulate it for you. This is the first video in a series I'm going to start on this channel, a VR patch report for Star Citizen covering everything that's changed, what's still broken, what's coming soon, and how it all feels in a headset. If you like VR, get subscribed so you don't miss them, and stay tuned to the end because we're going to talk about some exciting upcoming features. Star Citizen added experimental VR support with the 4.5 patch back in December, and I've covered the game's VR scene ever since. I want to give a massive shout out to Sylvan CIG and the team for their hard work to get us here. If you've been following this channel, you've seen me go from cautiously optimistic to fully invested in where this is headed. With 4.7, I think we crossed a line where VR in Star Citizen isn't an experimental mode anymore, even if that's the label they still use. CIG stepped up big with their support, working directly with Pimax to improve the experience. Let's start with the biggest changes in 4.7 for Pimax users specifically, because this one makes a huge difference to the overall experience. We don't need to use SteamVR as a workaround anymore. The native Pimax OpenXR runtime is no longer blocked by easy anti-cheat, and CIG has integrated support for it into the game. If you watched my Pimax setup guide, you remember we had to manually set SteamVR as the OpenXR runtime, route everything through that layer just to get the game to recognize the headset. Every user's been running Star Citizen through SteamVR as a middleman, and SteamVR adds a lot of overhead that costs you frames you just can't afford to lose in a game that's already pushing your hardware to the edge. With this change, all of that is gone and we have native support. The game talks directly to your Pimax headset, and the performance difference is something you feel immediately. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it, I refuse to run an FPS counter in VR. The real test is whether your brain stops noticing the technology and just accepts where you are. When the performance is there, the headset disappears, and when it's not, you feel it in your stomach before you would ever see it as a number on the screen. Star Citizen's 4.7 patch on the native Pimax runtime gets that seamless feeling more consistently than any patch I've ever played. Just like we had to make some changes in SteamVR with my old setup guide, I recommend you open Pimax Play in the device settings, then the game menu, set the image quality to customize, then use a value that works for you. I've been running it at 0.08 with very high settings in the game. I'll keep playing around with this on my own, but it's been smooth for me with those settings, and it's what I recorded all this B-roll with. Maybe a hidden bonus from that performance uplift is that VR is getting more affordable. Unlocking additional performance helped lower the graphics card requirement for a higher-end headset like the Crystal Super and Star Citizen. Pimax's own testing showed that a 5070 has decent performance in the game now. I know VR adoption costs are high, and anything to lower that bar of entry is a great thing for everybody. One other great part about this integration is that it exposes features to the devs that SteamVR just doesn't support. That opens the door to future improvements specific to the Pimax hardware, things like dynamic foveated rendering using the Crystal Super's built-in eye tracking. Our VR headsets already have this capability, and it's the game side that needs to catch up, so this is going to be how that happens. Now, the second big change affects everyone in VR, regardless of what headset you're wearing. CIG's engine can now render UI at a completely separate resolution from the 3D scene. As great as CIG's VR implementation has been, the UI was never made for VR specifically. Before this, every UI element, your inventory, your MFDs, any full screen interface was being rendered at the same resolution as the game world and getting stretched and distorted through the VR pipeline. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it looked bad, but if you've ever squinted at the inventory screen trying to figure out what you're looking at, that was the problem. Theater mode was a nice workaround for using the inventory, but the on-screen UI during the normal gameplay was still an issue. Now the UI renders on its own at whatever resolution you set. Default is 2560 by 1440, which works for something like a Quest 3. If you're on a Pimax Crystal Super or any higher resolution headset, you can push it higher through two console variables, and I've put the commands on the screen for you. I currently have mine running at 4480 by 2520, and I'm enjoying using the inventory at that scale. You can change your settings while in the game and running it using the console, so experiment until it looks sharp, without eating up your frames. The performance impact is minimal and the clarity improvement is exactly what we needed. You might remember from my Crystal Super review that I lost my mind when I could read the subscript on the MXR's cockpit buttons for the first time. That was in patch 4.5. With a separate UI resolution on 4.7, text clarity across every interface in the game took another step forward. Combine this with the massive changes to rendering shadows and light in the game, and the game is really starting to look optimized. I'm super impressed with everything that's been happening. Another noticeable feature in this patch was reworking the interface cursor. When you hold F, you'd move the cursor and hit a boundary at the edge of a fixed screen region, and it would just stop. That made it hard to interact with some things without turning your head to weird angles. The new system accumulates mouse movement directly with no artificial limit. The cursor can drift out of your field of view, and if it's decoupled from your head movement, but toggling it snaps it right back to the center. It's really cool. It's one of those fixes where the old way was so annoying that the new way feels like a feature, even though it's just really working the way it should have from the start. Still, it's a nice quality of life improvement. Now, gameplay-wise, the Atlas Mech UI works properly in VR now. The interaction wheel stays centered on your UI screen instead of drifting around with your head, which basically made it unusable for me without going into theater mode. Sylvan CIG mentioned the long-term plan is to render it in 3D space at the actual location of whatever you're interacting with, which would be a huge immersion win. For now, having it stay put is enough to make it usable. Now let's talk about all the things that still need some work. The inventory rework that came with 4.7 carries the same VR issues the old inventory had. Sylvan acknowledged it on Spectrum and said a proper fix needs involvement from the UI team. He's working on a temporary solution, but the real answer is going to take time. I'm enjoying using the inventory once I made it a lot larger, but if you're struggling with it, I recommend theater mode for now until a real fix is made. The close range markers are still broken, same deal, needs deeper work from the UI tech side. I highly recommend disabling the helmet visor unless you absolutely need it. It makes such a huge difference. And if you're on a meta quest through Link, you're still going to get reprojection artifacts when the frame rates drop. The workaround is disabling asynchronous space warp in the Oculus debug tool each session, or using virtual desktop with a strong Wi-Fi connection, which is how I connect when I use my Quest 3, and that works great. You can also pull your FOV tangents down to about 90% in the settings for a GPU performance boost on a Quest headset. And the roadmap beyond 4.7 is where this gets really exciting. Sylvan said back in January when he was a guest at the Pimax booth at CES 2026, that he's confident foveated rendering and quad views are coming in 2026. For anyone on a Pimax headset with eye tracking, foveated rendering would be transformative for performance. The headset only renders at full resolution where your eyes are actually looking and eases the load everywhere else. Your eyes can't tell the difference, but your GPU absolutely can. It's pretty freaking wild tech. It would potentially mean the game would play better in VR than on a standard monitor. Just think about that for a moment. Equally exciting and maybe a little unexpected was Chris Roberts confirming in February that Squadron 42 will ship with full VR support. He called it potentially the best VR implementation in any game. That's a bold claim, and we all know Chris says a lot of things, but if even half of Squadron 42's engine work feeds back into the persistent universe, VR players are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. The VR trajectory since 4.5 has been consistently upward with every patch. It's impressive as hell how much progress has already been made on VR compared to the glacial pace of traditional Star Citizen development. I really want to thank Pimax for sponsoring this video. I've talked about it before, but it's worth repeating. Pimax is the only VR company that's actively collaborating with CIG's developers to improve VR in Star Citizen and Squadron 42. That's a really big deal. I know some of you are burned out from their marketing, but consider that first. Every other headset maker has other priorities or is just fighting to survive. Pimax is in the room with the people writing the code, so to speak, so if you're looking to get into VR yourself, use code Katarn for a discount on their headsets. Link in the description. You'll get a free extended warranty and return protection if you order by April 10th. Pimax is so confident in their products that they know that you'll love it or they'll take it back. Seriously, how can you beat that? And if you're a VR player in Star Citizen, stick around. I'm going to keep covering this as a regular report on the channel because I'm passionate about it. Join the crew and hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.